greens powders, superfoods powders. It's like we have this philosophy that the longer the list is of ingredients, the better that it's going to be, and the more potent that it's going to be. It's not quite the case. What I want to set forth right out the gate is that you're not going to get everything that you need in terms of benefit from fruits and vegetables in a powder form, okay? And that probably goes without saying, okay? The largest benefit, if you ask me, that comes from vegetables is going to be from the fiber content, both soluble and insoluble, okay? So when it comes down to how that works in the body and how it contributes to short-chain fatty acid production, which are basically the end product of the bacteria feeding on fibers, okay? It's not just roughage, it's the bacteria that feeds on the fiber. That's really the benefit here. But this is something I've been wanting to do for a while, breaking down what you should really be looking for in terms of a superfoods powder. So let's go ahead and dive in. First ingredient I want to touch on is one that I'm seeing pop up in a lot more supplements lately, and I think it's worth talking about. That's goji berry powder. Interesting world with this. There's a study that was published in the journal Toxicology Reports that found that when cultured cells were treated with goji berry extract, there was an increase in antioxidant activity and a decrease in reactive oxygen species. This is a good thing, but you got to remember, this is in a petri dish. This is an in vitro study, so it doesn't directly translate into humans. Now, this sort of paves the way for this whole conversation. We don't always want to be bombarding ourselves with antioxidants, okay? The benefit that we get from eating fruits and vegetables isn't necessarily just, again, going to be that we're bombarding ourselves with these powerful antioxidants that are going to save the day. It's that we are giving our body the tools that it needs to facilitate its own antioxidant capabilities, okay? That's why things like fasting, things like that, where you're inducing stress in the body, actually trigger that response by your body to upregulate antioxidant capabilities. That's why everyone should just go eat a bunch of cake, destroy their body. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so with this, I don't think that it's something that you need to be absolutely having in a powder. So if you're seeking out a superfood powder because it has goji in it, I just don't think it's necessarily something that's required, but it isn't bad when it's added in. Okay, moving into the next one. This one is a powder or a compound that I think is very beneficial. That's going to be seaweed powder or kelp powder. This is one that has been demonstrated because of the iodine levels to be very, very good when it comes down to the thyroid, right? We have to pay attention to that kind of thing. Our thyroid, we cannot produce triiodothyronine or T4, thyroxine, without having iodine. That's why there's iodized salt, right? Because they add iodine into the salt because it is such a nutritional necessity. But being able to get it in a form like this is quite good. Usually more expensive, and you're usually going up market on these kinds of super greens or superfood powders. But there's also a very robust mineral profile with a bunch of zinc, which is good for a multitude of different things for men and women. Now, there's also going to be chlorella and spirulina that kind of fall into that algae seaweed category. Spirulina, I'm a much bigger fan of. Chlorella is still a really good one, but when you look at sort of the potential benefits as far as endurance work goes, potential red blood cells, everything like that, spirulina seems to be the bigger one. So I would much rather see more like spirulina, more chlorella, more of that kind of thing versus, say, wheatgrass, which we're going to talk about in a second. I don't want to totally rain on the wheatgrass parade, but we have to remember that we're not really designed to break down grass. So it raises some question in my mind because with wheatgrass, there's something called wheat germ agglutinin, okay? The question is, does this wheat germ agglutinin trigger the same kind of gluten response that someone that's sensitive to gluten or celiac would have? Like, does it trigger that? It's a little bit up in the air, but essentially it can make it so these things called prolamins, which are these storage proteins that are in like the actual like wheat itself or the wheatgrass itself, could make it so that there's a little bit of almost confusion with the T-gase antibodies and TPO antibodies in our system. What that means is some people that are sensitive to gluten may end up being sensitive to wheatgrass, to rye, to barley, things like that, even oat to a certain degree. So the question that I bring up is it actually giving us much benefit for the potential risk? That's where it doesn't really add up. There's not a lot of nutritional value, and some experts will say, oh, well, there's chlorophyll in it, it's green. The whole chlorophyll thing is kind of confusing because just because something's green doesn't mean that we're getting the same like benefit. We're not getting the hemoglobin benefit, we're not getting the benefit that a plant's gonna get because we're not going through photosynthesis, we're not doing the same thing. Not saying that chlorophyll is bad, but we can't really find solid evidence that it's like as amazing as everyone makes it out to be. So is wheatgrass this terrible thing that shouldn't be in there? No, but take it for what it's worth. It's more of a filler and more of something to give it green volume and make it a green drink, so to speak. I know this video is about superfoods powders and things like that, but at the end of the day, like, eat good food, okay? And we're gonna get down to the other ingredients, but I first wanna say a note from our video sponsor, which is Thrive Market. If you are looking for different kinds of foods to kind of just explore different dietary patterns, maybe you want to get some superfoods that are actually foods, like maybe you want to have some chia seeds or some flaxseed crackers or things like that. Thrive Market has it all. They've got all your pantry staples for things like that. They're awesome and they are a game changer. For me, it's a convenience thing. I don't necessarily want to go just pound a superfoods powder. That's not how I roll. Sure, there's a time and a place, but for me, convenience is more about having good food on hand. And with Thrive Market, they make it so the good food is available. They've done the vetting for us. They've made it so that foods that are on their digital shelves, so to speak, have already gone through the ringer when it comes down to being a good enough product to be on Thrive's website, right? To be on Thrive Market. But when you look at their website, you can see like you can sort by different diet category, keto, vegan, paleo, and then it just gets delivered to your doorstep. It's awesome. They've been a big sponsor of this channel for years. And because of that, there's a link down below that'll save you 25% off your first order with them, plus get a free gift. So please just check them out. Trust me when I say it will change how you grocery shop. Okay, the next one we want to talk about is beetroot. When you see beetroot powder, okay, it's not necessarily a red flag. I don't want to say that. Like, beetroot powder is good, but what you want to see is you want to see it down towards the bottom. Okay, we don't need copious amounts of beetroot to get the mild job done. Okay, where we get a benefit from beetroot is not from the antioxidant profile. It's more so from the fact that it has a higher degree of nitrate in it, which means that it can potentially kind of relax the blood vessels a little bit, get more potential blood flow and more nutrient delivery that way. But we don't need this massive increase in it, because the problem is that beetroot is also an oxalate, which means that it will chelate some of the minerals and things like that that are in the powder to begin with. So if we have a high degree of beetroot that's aimed to be more of like a performance greens or something like that, you run into that issue. So yes, you want to see it, but you want to see it further on down the list. There was actually a study that was published in the British Journal of Nutrition that found that beetroot juice, in this particular case, inhibited magnesium absorption. And magnesium is involved in like 300 different enzymatic functions in the body. You do not want to inhibit the absorption of that. Okay, the next one is one of my personal favorites, and it's getting added into a lot of different superfoods powders now, which I'm happy to see. Okay, and that's called ashwagandha, or ashwagandha, potato. Okay, this is what's called an adaptogen, and I'll spare you the kind of the gory details on that, but an adaptogen is something that allows you to become more resilient. It helps you deal with stressors and adapt to them. Okay, so the whole classification of adaptogens is pretty wild, right? There's a lot of them, and a lot of rodent models, a lot of human models, but the rodent models really demonstrate that adaptogens do work in terms of helping them cope with physical stress and even mental stress. There was a study that was published in the American Nutraceutical Association that found that ashwagandha ended up reducing serum cortisol levels. Cortisol is like the stress response hormone, which is pretty fascinating. Okay, it doesn't mean that it stops the stressor, but it helps control and modulate the body's response to the stressor. It also found that it decreased C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker, which is pretty cool. But then there was a really interesting study published in the journal Phytochemistry that found that ashwagandha, when muscle cells were treated with ashwagandha, it encouraged glucose uptake. It improved that glucose uptake. So it made it so that the cells were able to take up glucose. Granted, that's in a petri dish, not in a human, but it could be translatable. We just need more data to see. So maybe it helps with the whole insulin system. Maybe it helps with beta cells, pancreas. It's pretty cool stuff, and I think that it's something that's valid in a superfoods powder. Another one that I like to see in a superfoods powder is going to be broccoli sprout. Broccoli sprout powder, very rich in sulforaphane, which if you do a quick Google search, you'll see a bunch of benefits there. So that's one that I typically like to see too. Now, a couple things I think you should not necessarily avoid, but don't be flabbergasted by, because they're nothing crazy. Sometimes they'll have things like apple powder or like some weird kind of thing using apple in there. I will be the first to say that apples are a low glucose fruit with a high amount of fiber. They're a decent fruit, believe it or not, when it comes down to being able to have something sweet that's not going to negatively impact you a lot. But if someone is taking apple powder and putting it into a compound, there's practically nothing there. There's pectin. Now you're going to get pectin and maybe some cellulose. So you're really not paying for anything. So really be careful with a lot of like the fruit extracts and like the fruit powders, things like that. Okay, you're not getting a heck of a lot of value because they're not giving you much benefit. You're left with cellulose, the fiber, and you're left with some antioxidant effect. You're going to get more antioxidant benefit probably by going for a run and upregulating your body's natural antioxidant processes than you are by taking in some super rich mega berry smoothie drink thing. It's just not going to work that way. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. Hope this video clears some stuff up. I'll see you tomorrow.